Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 32 of 5 Reasons Not to Harm Your Loved Ones During Quarantine. And today I'm going to do the COVID-19 update pretty quickly. First and foremost, if you're interested in following Title IX and students' rights or the accused rights or the accuser's rights on university campuses, specifically where historically there has been very little due process. Elizabeth DeVos has put in place, they're going into effect very, very shortly, if not today, some really helpful measures to make that system more just, and you can read more about that on the Facebook page. There's an article there. There are other live casts where we've only talked about Title IX and that type of equal opportunity and equal protection of all students from sexual violence on campus. And if you're interested in that, I will post the link to read more about the new additions and amendments to expand the rights of students and the accused in those proceedings. As of today, also, we have 45,045 cases of COVID-19 in Michigan. That's up over, it's about 1,200 cases more than yesterday. And we have 4,250 deaths, up from 4,179 the day before. So definitely not as many people dying, but more people reporting that they are sick. And of course, that's because we have more testing and the different distribution of the cases and where they are now as opposed to where they were before. We are in week 8 from the first case of COVID-19 that happened in Michigan. And we are in about week 6, I think, maybe 7, of the stay-at-home order by the governor. The Michigan Republicans have filed a lawsuit against Governor Whitmer. We talked a little bit about it yesterday, questioning if she has the ability to give herself emergency powers during or declare a state of emergency without the legislature's consent under different bodies of law than what she had previously had her power under. So that is also something to watch. Again, great way to teach history to your children, dealing with balance of power, abuse of power, and those types of historical arguments and lessons that they can learn about. This really is history in the making and the battle of power. Also, the president is involved in the battle of power, as we know, because our governor is that lady from Michigan, or maybe it's that woman from Michigan, but regardless, she's doing awesome. She has plans, and today more of them will go into effect. Today, both construction and real estate are going back to work, and so as promised, she will slowly start sending people back to work as she deems safe based on the science. She will be speaking this afternoon at 3 p.m. with a little more detail about the opening up of our state little by little, and how she's going to get people back to work. As of today, there's 1.1 million people who have filed for unemployment in Michigan since March 1st. That's a really, really scary number. And so now on to today's topics, which this was astounding to me, but according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 1 in 3 women or 1 in 4 men will experience violence from a partner during their lifetime. And in Michigan, And we did talk about domestic violence back in one of the first 5 episodes. And at that point, I had interviewed. Let's talk about why we are seeing a domestic violence surge. That there's a domestic violence situation. Kind of what happens next after the call is made and the police are involved. So outside more, and so they have access to people who are at recently, and so that surge. As people get more frustrated with staying home, they're drinking more, they're gambling, and with an increase of stress, there's always an increase in violence. And right now, I think everyone in Michigan about money in some way, shape, or form. I wanted to take a minute to mention a woman named Shanae Clayton. And I don't know if any of you have read about her or heard of her, but she lived in Pontiac, and she was shot by her longtime boyfriend, her because she had survived COVID-19. She had violence, and that, you know, police, you're the attorneys, the judges, whoever it is. I don't think there's anyone in the world, even who would like to, than we know or that we would like to believe. So it's stats time. You know, I love them. So in the last 30 days, in Oakland County, cases of domestic violence presented for a warrant. Last April, it was right around 100. So it's about double for this month, for the month, and 50 calls in March to First Step. And Macomb County, their Turning Point, has had an increase of agencies that help victims and provide better counseling quadrupled the amount of people calling for help and needing help since the beginning of March, when COVID-19 first arrived in Michigan. Ironically, the Detroit Police Department had 1,796 calls for domestic violence in the past month, where last year it was 2,052. In Washtenaw, they've seen an increase of 16%. In Southfield, they have seen a decrease, 111 the past month. Out of it, I was looking at these aggravating factors that we already talked about and when people have access. So now let's talk about what domestic violence is. Domestic violence is any time that any person is touched without their consent. The amount of jail time, if you get any, is 93 days. If it's your second offense, it's a 1-year offense, it's a felony. With felonious assault, which is assault with a deadly weapon. If you're severely injured, you'll also be charged with assault with intent to do great bodily harm or assault with intent to murder, which is a life offense. So that's what determines the severity of the crime that would be charged. Domestic violence is a policy issue in most jurisdictions. And what I mean by that is that if someone committed to remove the alleged perpetrator from the scene, what that means is that someone is going to be arrested. If that depends on the facts. If they have just taken a walk, they would be arrested. That doesn't count as really leaving. The reason behind this, it diffuses the scene and it protects the public. Then what happens? If the person is intoxicated or not, depending on populations at the police station versus lockup at the county jail, the person will or will not be transported. It can't be by email. You can't send flowers. You cannot tell your kid to your spouse a message, direct or indirect. Another condition of bond, and this is what really, really creates a lot of problems right now during COVID-19 and the stay-home order, is that not only will you not be able to have contact with the alleged victim, but you also won't be able to return home in getting your personal belongings and effects from the home. You have to go with a police officer called a peace day. Well, I don't know about how you guys feel, but no matter who it was, if they haven't been quarantining the way I'm quarantining, which since they just spent time in jail, obviously they're not quarantined, know that I would come within 6 feet of you after being in jail for that short period of time. As we talked about really in depth yesterday and a couple times last week, COVID-19. So that is kind of how the process starts and the immediate problems. Because there's a possibility of going to jail, a person who is accused of domestic violence does need an attorney. And if you can't afford one, the court will appoint one for you. If you hire one, you have a choice of who that will be, obviously. And if your attorney, after you are released from jail and find someplace to go, the next thing that will happen in your domestic violence cases, and this is what makes them very difficult for people to understand, is that the person gets out of jail and then the alleged victim is you. Okay, well, this is a problem because as much as there is a bond condition out there, a condition of your release home because your spouse or boyfriend or whoever says, oh my God, I made a mistake, it wasn't domestic violence. If it's charged, then it's actually the people of the state of Michigan that are prosecuting the alleged abuser. It's not the person who, the alleged victim, does not want to prosecute, and they're not going to participate, and they're not going to show up for court. It is possible by the case based on the 911 call, and if there's any other records, whoever who witnessed the domestic violence. So sometimes, depending on the case, they go forward even if the complaining witness decides they don't want to come to court and they don't want to testify. Say that they don't want to testify, it is not uncommon for the police to tell them that they are obstructing justice and that they may be prosecuted themselves for filing a false police report. So those are discussions that happen in these cases. Those are things my clients ask me all the time. So normal order entered with conditions of pretrial release. It may include that you can't return home. It may have a mandatory drug testing provision. It may have no drugs or illegal substances without a prescription. It may have therapy. It may have drug treatment. It may have. So now there will be more conditions to the pretrial. Because it's on the same day, then the person will have a pretrial. At the pretrial, that's how they want their case to go forward. Do they want to plead guilty? Do they want to plead no? But you're going to let the court find you guilty based on either what's in the police report or the 911 call or some other evidence that can be making an admission. It is being found guilty. A no contest plea is still being found guilty. A lot of people think if they pled no contest that means that they're not guilty and they're just moving their case along. That's not true. If you plead not guilty, then your case will go to trial and you can have a jury trial, and it's the same process that we've talked about before that leads up to a trial if you're sentenced next. Obviously, if you're found not guilty, then nothing else happens. It's dismissed. So there is a special statute for people who plead guilty, not no contest. It has to be guilty. In Michigan, it's MCL 769.4A. When it was originally incepted over 20 years ago, I remember I was already an attorney when it became, and it's just what the experienced practitioners used to say, 769.4a allows a person to plead guilty if it's involved in their sentence. Then it would be to understand that it's dismissed, it's not expunged, it's not. There are some collateral consequences to that as well. So that is essentially. I wanted to just take a minute before we end today to talk about personal protection orders. Once is reported, basically a personal protection order bars someone from is a civil proceeding, but it's like quasi-criminal because if you violate it, you could go to jail. They can be granted ex parte, which means that the judge is going to receive a form with a bunch of allegations. Abusive event occurred, this abusive event occurred, this abusive event occurred, events, or they were disrupted at work in an abusive fashion. Could be any one of those things. But they have to be in imminent danger. And if the judge finds that they are in imminent danger, the PPO would be granted without a hearing. Then the person who it's against, the person who's being restrained, then has 21 days to object to it. And then there would be a hearing, and then the judge would decide if it was going to remain in place or as granted ex parte. Is it going to be modified or amended, or is it going to be dismissed? Another possibility, if it doesn't rise to the level of being granted ex parte, is that it would just be set for hearing by the judge. And then the judge would hear the evidence from both sides and decide if it should be granted and if this person is someone to be protected. If you have a domestic violence case and a no contact provision, understand the case, is charged through sentencing in, let's say in 60 days, and then the contact provision is probably going to be in effect for for the 14 months. A PPO, it has an expiration after, and the person can ask for them in a year, but I'm still afraid that isn't going to get it renewed. And it has to be renewed before the expiration. There's no grace period there if you let it expire and then you want it back. Either one of these, whether it's a no contact or a personal protection enforcement information network, if you were pulled over, if you had any contact with law enforcement, and they're going to know. So just FYI. The provisions of both a pretrial release order and of a PPO are the defendant, the person who's accused, responsibility. So if, see if the no contact order is being enforced, or if a neighbor sees them together and calls the police, and yes, that does happen, even though the complaining witness came to the accused's home and he had no notice of it, he just opened the door, he could possibly be in trouble. And so you see the alleged victims are stalking by text and calling and or your loved one or whoever it is. You have to understand that even though this involves you as an alleged, kind of like the hand grenade, if you come near, that's really important. And judge, if you walk into your child's sporting event and the other person is there, you have to leave, or you have to be in a completely different area where you can't be seen or heard. You can't have your kids running between you giving messages. Seriously. One of the questions that I see coming up is whether or not a person who is the alleged victim, if they want to get rid of the no contact provision, if they want to have contact for therapy, or they want their person to move back in, or whatever it is that possible? And yes, it is. We just have to ask the judge. We have a legitimate go forward like that. Pretty much what I wanted to share with that. And with that, I will give you the 5 reasons not to harm your loved ones during quarantine. And then, so reason number 1, and I feel like some of you, I'm so thankful that you do watch. If there's any topic that you talk about, or if you have any questions, just make sure you throw it up. So first reason, protective services workers are essential. Second reason is that the potential. The third reason is, as we know, our jails, our prisons, there's hotbed of COVID-19. Number 4 is that parents can get in trouble for kids being kids. And of course, number 5, no one, well, maybe just very few people, really look good in horizontal stripes. So with that, I will hope that you